Welcome to Age of Sigmar Strategy Academy. In this episode, we will be covering the militaristic, profiteering, and skyfaring dwarves of the mortal realms, the Kharadron Overlords. I'll be going over their lore, their gameplay, and even how to play against them if you're ever staring them down on the other side of the table. To start, let's go over their story and how they came to be. In the Age of Myth, Grungni, the Duarden god of the Forge, had once taught the Duarden across the mortal realms to craft an impressive array of fantastic inventions, harnessing the magical metals scattered throughout the lands. However, there came a time when Grungni envisioned his people standing proudly on their own, no longer dependent on his divine intervention. So, he left his people and let them forge their own path, and they were successful in doing so in the countless years that passed. But, as the Age of Chaos unfurled and demons relentlessly invaded every corner of the realms, these mighty Duarden kingdoms crumbled. And Grungni, despite the anguish of his people, refrained from intervening, leaving many Duarden feeling forsaken by the pantheon of order. The survivors of the initial onslaught soon realized that the reliance on gods and kings from their old way of life had become pointless. They needed to draw upon their own ingenious resourcefulness if they wanted to survive. These Duarden took to the skies, navigating with their formidable sky vessels, and became what we now know as the Kharadron Overlords. Bearing witness to the dire consequences for those who did not adapt, they understood the urgency for a society-wide change, and united, they forged the Kharadron Code, a comprehensive set of rules that every Kharadron must adhere to. These rules meticulously dictate every aspect of Kharadron life, from the intricacies of trade and war to the fine details of brewing standards. In this bold new society, meritocracy reigns supreme, with an individual's worth determined by their achievements rather than the ancestral bonds of their predecessors. To power their awe-inspiring sky vessels, the Kharadron Overlords embark on daring odysseys through the skies, confronting colossal flying beasts and horrific chaos abominations, to mine the gaseous metal known as aether gold. This invaluable resource serves as the lifeblood of their society, sculpting their remarkable way of life and setting them apart as an indomitable force in a turbulent world. On the tabletop, the Kharadron Overlords are renowned as the most shooting-focused army in Age of Sigmar, as they have an arsenal of guns to blast their opponents off the table. And that's not to say they are pushovers in combat, as their shooting is a great way to soften their targets and remove screens before ramming their ships in to deliver high-value melee attacks. And granted, they do have their weaknesses. By their nature, the troops are a little vertically challenged and completely covered in thick metal armor. As such, they move pitifully slow, meaning they sort of rely on their sky vessels to move them around and get anywhere meaningful. So once the boats start getting taken down, the rest of the army starts to lose most of its mobility and utility. So, what rules do you get for playing a Kharadron Overlords army? Firstly, you get the ability to have your troops get inside your sky vessels by embarking, and get out of your sky vessels by disembarking. If you really want to, you can read all of that, but the gist is, whenever your troops move next to the boat in the movement phase, they can hop in. And in later turns, as long as the boat hasn't moved yet, they can hop out in the movement phase. Also, your units inside are -1 to be hit, and have +1 to save, making them a lot more durable. Next, you get to role-play as a rules lawyer. As with any set of rules, there will always be different interpretations. The same can even be said for the finely crafted Kharadron Code. The best Kharadron are well-versed in navigating the code, and finding ways to make it best fit their own needs. As such, you get to pick your own way to use the code in your army, picking an article, amendment, and footnote to use. That's right, Age of Sigmar offers you the thrilling experience of diving into fantasy legal documents. Absolutely exhilarating, I know. Anyways, for your articles, you get 3 options. Starting from the top and moving to the bottom, you can pick from a 4-up rally for your army, a +2 to move for your sky vessels, and +1 to wound against a specific unit for the whole game. I'd say all three of these are decent, but my personal favorite would have to be the 4-up rally, since it gives some pretty crazy regeneration to your units. Although the +1 to wound feels good, since otherwise it's a pretty rare bonus to find in the army. Next are amendments, which are once per turn bonuses. Making your Arcanaut company count as 2 on objectives isn't very good, mostly because the army is pretty bad at objective play anyways, and as a general rule, it's usually better to lean into something you're already good at. And most lists aren't bringing many Arcanaut company, it's usually just a unit or 2 of them. The 2d6 run once per turn is my personal favorite. I just really enjoy the extra movement. But re-rolling a dice for your shooting every once in a while isn't too shabby either. Lastly are footnotes, which are once a game bonuses. The 3d6 charge is absolutely the most fun and one of the best options. Shooting after you get shot isn't my favorite, since there will be plenty of armies that this does nothing against, and your opponent can play around it pretty easily. And the other good option allows a boat to receive 2 commands in a phase rather than just 1. This is rather underwhelming with the basic command abilities, but where it really shines is when used with the faction-specific command abilities. These work mostly like your usual commands, but it can only be issued by Arcanaut admirals and sky vessels, although sky vessels have to issue it to themselves. Combat landing allows you to pop out units inside a boat even if the boat already moved that turn. Very nice for getting your units out of a boat and in the enemy's face, or on objectives. Fly high allows you to do a standard teleport with a sky vessel, and disengage allows you to retreat and still shoot later. All 3 of these abilities are very powerful options to have access to. However, as these are command abilities, it's going to mean that the army is very command point hungry, so keep that in mind throughout the video when building your own lists. Lastly, when you play this army, your boats get access to a unique kind of enhancement called Great Engine Works. These are like artifacts, but for your boats, each kind of boat having a different option to use. You normally only get 1 in your lists, but like most enhancements, there are ways to get access to more. One way you can personalize your own fleet is by picking a sub-faction that appeals to you. There are 6, but I really only like 4 of them. Barrack Nar gives you extra command points to play around with in a famously command-hungry army, and Grunstock Thunderers become battle line, which is nice given they are one of the best units in the book. And with Barrack Urbaz, you know those 2 really good articles you had to decide between? The 4-up rally and the +1 to wound? Well, now you get both, which is really nice. And Battle Line Gun Haulers, which is neat, I guess. Not as cool as Battle Line Thunderers, though. Barrack Zilfin gives you an extra engine work. This is nice, but it also has another easy-to-overlook upside. It makes Arcanaut frigates battle line instead of Behemoth, meaning they'll fit inside battalions easier, helping you reduce your drops. Zilfin is where you want to go if you want to bring multiple big boats without increasing your drops too much. Barrack Zan is the melee subfaction, where you get better attacks when you charge. You also get Battle Line Skywardens, which are your punchy melee troops, and you are heavily incentivized to bring as many of them as possible in these kind of lists. Now, we are moving to the subfactions I like a lot less. For Barrack Thring, bringing allied dwarf priests from Cities of Sigmar or Fireslayers gets you a good free prayer for them to use. This is weird. No offense, but I didn't get into this army to play models from some other army. I think my biggest issue with it is it's not the most consistent. If you fail your prayer, or if your priest gets shot off the board, you basically don't get to have a subfaction ability for the rest of the game, which kinda sucks. Also, since the priest lacks the correct keywords, it can't go inside a boat, so it will often struggle to keep up with the rest of your army. Currently, if I had to pick a priest to use, it would probably be a Rune Lord, due to how cheap it is. but that could easily change with the release of the next Cities of Sigmar battle tome coming soon. And lastly, we have Barrack Mornar. This one is so close to being good since stopping commands on a 5-up is powerful, but it's just a bit too easy for your opponent to play around. Let's say there is an enemy unit in range of this ability, and you shoot at them. Taking this subfaction could potentially stop the opponent from issuing the all-out defense command, right? Well, if the opponent has a hero outside of the 12-inch range, they can issue it to the unit from that hero, effectively mitigating your subfaction ability completely, since the ability only works if the unit issues the command, not receives. It's a neat idea, but the first 4 subfactions I mentioned feel better from my experience. Now, let's get into the real meat of it, the units. These aren't necessarily in any order, but do follow the general trend going from the best stuff to the more okay-ish options. First, we have the Arcanaut Admiral. This dude is awesome. Currently, I start every list I write with this model as my general. And if you do so when you make your army list, you pick one of your sky vessels to be the flagship. And once per turn, this model can issue a command to the flagship for free. As I mentioned before, command points are very important, so getting more for free is pretty necessary. Next, once a game, he can buff one of your troops rend by 1. I mean, what's more to say other than extra rend is good, especially in a world where save stacking is so common. He also gets a couple command abilities on his War Scroll. You can give a boat a little extra damage if it didn't move at all, which is whatever. But with the other, you can give a boat run and shoot, which is nice. As a final cherry on top, he wields a big damage 3 hammer. Another reason why you want this hero in particular as your general is the 18-inch bubble of issuing commands that generals get synergizes pretty well with the fact it will be issuing commands left and right to your skyships. The other auto-include hero would be the Etheric Navigator. This fella can unbind spells like a wizard, but more importantly, in your hero phase you can roll 6 dice and pick one of the 2 effects. For each 1 you rolled, you can pick a sky vessel and make it move d3 plus 3, or for each 6, you can pick an enemy, do some mortal wounds, and just straight up half their movement until your next hero phase. Both abilities have a range of 30 inches as well, which might as well say the whole board. Most of the time, you will be having enemy movement. In a game like Age of Sigmar, with such high priority on objective control, controlling how far your opponent can move is stupidly powerful, and can sometimes completely cripple your opponent's plan if their army relies on one powerful unit to do most of the heavy lifting. Moving on to what I would call the best troop in the army, we have Grundstock Thunderers. The only reason you wouldn't have these in your list is because you want to go melee heavy with Barrack Zahn, and even then they're good in that subfaction too. So, they can either be armed with rifles or a variety of specialized weapons. You pretty much always build them with the special weapons, though. They have shorter ranges, but their damage output is much better. What makes them so good is they're a quality shooting unit that absorbs a variety of buffs very well. They can punch a big hole in the enemy army if you give them the right support. They also have a 3-up save, which is pretty rare to see on a shooting unit. And if they fire all of their weapons into a single target, they have a chance to debuff the target with -1 to hit. Overall, you're usually missing out if you don't bring at least 10 of these in your lists. The other awesome troop this army has to offer are Endrin Riggers. They're fast with a whopping 12-inch movement thanks to the balloons they strapped onto their back, and have hand saws, which can do some real nasty melee damage. Although they're extremely frail, so it's often a good choice to keep them inside of your boats, which works out really well with their signature ability, Emergency Field Repairs. With it, once per turn at the end of any phase, you can heal one of your nearby sky vessels. On average, for every 3 models, you'll heal 2 wounds to the ship. Remember earlier how I mentioned that keeping the boats alive is important due to all the great stuff that they do? Well, these are the best way to do so thanks to their solid healing and the ability to stab anybody that wants to get close enough to take down your boats. Also, I highly recommend reinforcing them once or twice. They normally come in groups of 3, which often don't feel as good from my experience. So make sure to have a unit of 6 or even 9 in your army. And don't give them any of their special weapons. Their saws are just too good to pass up. Speaking of boats, you will almost always have at least one of these 2 sky vessels in your army. They both count as 5 models on an objective, can hold your troops inside, and drop bombs on enemies when they move over them, which does some decent ship damage. Also, both of them have some different weapon options. Just don't use the skyhooks, they are bad. The Argonaut frigate is your medium-sized boat. It can hold 12 models, has some decent shooting, and is exactly what you want if you want to get in your opponent's face with some melee attacks, as it does around 4 mortal wounds on the charge, and immediately afterwards your units inside can pop out of the boat and get the strike first effect. Although it's not always the right play to bring your units outside of the boat, as they're often more safe inside. But it opens up a lot of interesting plays. And for the engine work enhancement for frigates, you will usually just go with the one that gives you +2 move. It's not a very exciting ability, but the other options are just worse. Next, we have the Argonaut Ironclad, which is the biggest boat you have access to. And it's a rather large model in person, which is awesome. Since this boat is so thick, it can hold a whopping 22 models, almost double that of the frigate, and it does the most damage per point out of any of the boats, especially since you get more value out of commands like Unleash Hell or All-Out Attack. The transport capacity is the main draw of this, as it's the only way to carry around a double reinforced unit of Thunderers, or any real meaningful amount of troops. For enhancements, you have a few fun options, but the best 2 would be the Battle Ram, giving you a decent amount of mortal wounds on the charge, which pairs especially well with the 3d6 charge footnote, and the Last Word gives you a free mini Unleash Hell with your main weapon, which does in fact stack with regular Unleash Hell. Punishing your opponent even more for trying to fight you is always appreciated. If you're looking for your basic support hero, look no further, as we have the Aether Chemist. Enemy units within 3 inches of it are -1 to hit, and once in each of your shooting phases, if it's not inside of a boat, it can give another troop outside of a boat some extra rend on their shooting. Very basic war scroll, but it's great when paired with Thunderers. So, with our absolute best units out of the way, I'll now be talking about our models that are still fantastic, but you'll have to put some thought into whether they make the cut or not in your lists. The Endrin Master with Endrin Harness is the only unit in the army without any ranged attacks. But that's only because he's too busy swinging around a damage 3 hammer. He can heal 3 wounds to a boat, but unlike the flexible healing of Endrin Riggers, this is only at the start of your hero phase. But it can ensure your boats are flying at full capacity, as on a 2-up, the boat it's in uses the top row of its damage table. Lastly, and arguably most importantly, it unlocks Battle Line for your Endrin Riggers. And it doesn't even need to be the general, it just needs to be in your army, which is nice, since a block of 9 Endrin Riggers works very well with the 4-up rally the army has access to. Next we have our named hero, Brock Grungson, Lord Magnate of Barrack Nar. If you couldn't guess by the name, this guy is kind of a big deal in Kharadron society. And if you're playing a Barrack Nar army, you will be using this guy. For a hero, he's equipped with a ton of crazy gear. He has a balloon, so he moves 12 inches, and he's kitted out with so many guns he does around the same amount of damage in the shooting phase as your medium-sized boat. And, much like the Endrin Riggers, he also carries a saw to do some solid melee damage. Most importantly, if he makes a charge move, your Barrack Nar units get +1 attacks in the following combat phase. I mean, I'll take some extra attacks for my already powerful melee units anytime. Also, he has that same command ability the Admiral does, where your boats can run and charge, but he can give it to 3 units for the price of 1. For his current points value, this guy is an auto-include, but only in his home sub-faction. For the screening unit in this army, you have the Argonaut Company. You get 10 of them for cheap, and you get a bonus for shooting units on objectives. The main things that keep them from being an auto-include is the fact that they're difficult to transport due to their high model count, and they're currently kind of outclassed by Thunderers in a lot of ways, who aren't that much more expensive currently. Although I suspect that that will change soon, since currently Kharadron Overlords are overperforming by quite a bit, and I have to imagine Thunderers are at the top of the nerf list. If you are a prospective Barrack Zahn player, then Skywardens are what you want. These are the other variant of your balloon-based troops. They're like engine riggers, but they trade the ability to heal for some more killing potential. Also, like engine riggers, you don't want to equip them with their special weapons, as their melee weapons are just too good to pass up, especially since melee damage is like their only job. While they are great in Barrack Zahn, I'm not impressed enough by them to use them in other skyports. The gun hauler is your smallest boat. So small, in fact, it can't even hold any troops inside of it. Unless, of course, you give it the collapsible compartments engine work, so it can hold 6 models. Its main job is to scoot around and be annoying. It's the fastest thing in the army, thanks to the fact that once a game it can move an additional 6 inches, giving it 18 inches of movement to work with. Also, it gives a 6-up ward for your larger boats while nearby. It's a minor bonus, but it's not bad. Your other good option for engine work is to give it the spar torpedo for some mortal wounds on the charge. And with that engine work, its good movement, and its shooting attack, it actually has a decent chance of being able to go off and kill an unguarded foot hero. The newest model added to the army is the Codewright, and he is fine. While he is by your general, you get a little extra command points to work with, and he has a unique heroic action that has the chance to allow you to swap your chosen footnote or amendment for a new one, which brings some utility. This model isn't awful, but I just kind of wish you didn't have to use a heroic action to use its main ability, as it doesn't really do a ton outside of that. And lastly, we have the Engine Master with Dirigible Suit. This is like the other Engine Master, but with a balloon strapped on him. This hero also unlocks Engine Rigger Battle Line and heals a boat in your hero phase. It also makes the Engine Rigger healing better. While they're nearby him, you bring their healing from about 2 per pack of 3 to 3 per pack of 3 Engine Riggers. I don't find myself using this unit often, mostly because I just want to bring more of our other units. He is a bit pricey. And that's all of the good units for Kharadron Overlords. There are a few more, but they're not really worth talking about in my opinion. With all of the units out of the way, let's go into options for enhancements. With command traits, you have some real interesting options out of the 6 available. X-Grundstock unlocks the battle line role for your Grundstock units, those being Thunderers and Gun Haulers, which is nice given how strong Grundstock Thunderers are. And once per turn, your general can issue a command for free on a Grundstock unit. I mean, that's just more free command points to work with. Stormcaller allows you to reroll the dice for your Navigator's main ability. This is also very powerful since, as I mentioned earlier, reducing movement is good. The more debuffs, the merrier. While I'm not the biggest fan of Cunning Fleetmaster, it can open up some interesting plays, as it allows you to move the boat in your opponent's turn. It's good, but I just prefer the raw value of the other 2 options. Now for artifacts. Like command traits, you have 6 options to pick from, and half of them are really powerful. Celestium Burst Grenade allows you to turn off a ward once a game on a 2-up. For some units, their ward is vital for their survival, so just turning it off can spell doom for them immediately. Although it should be noted, not all armies have wards, and dang, does rolling the 1 feel awful when it happens. Following that is the Voidstone Orb, which can be given to your Navigator, and allows you to once a game auto-unbind a spell. In most games where the enemy army is bringing magic, there's just that one spell you'll need to stop. Maybe it's a teleport that will move some big scary monster right up to you, or maybe it's a spell that'll do a ton of mortal wounds and will take a decent chunk out of your army. And sometimes it's only just the basic Mystic Shield you will need to stop, as the opponent getting any bonuses to save could make taking them down later extremely difficult. Regardless of what the spell is, completely shutting it down without any chance of failure is valuable. This artifact has saved my butt quite a few times. And lastly, we have Spell in a Bottle, which can be taken by the chemist. It allows you to take one of the generic endless spells for your army for free. And you can cast it once a game, and the cast cannot be stopped. So, the obvious question is, what spell do you bring? Most of the time, it's going to be Soul Scream Bridge, weirdly enough, as it can be used to bring your Thunderers across the table without the need of a boat to carry them around. Or it can be used to teleport a boat without the need for Fly High, which opens up a lot of interesting options. For example, you could have one boat teleport using Fly High, and then the other could use Soul Scream Bridge, which could allow you to teleport two boats, which you normally can't do. After all of that, you should have a good idea of how to craft your own Kharadron Overlords lists. But as a final measure, I'll show off some lists you can use in your own games, or as a jumping off point to write your own lists. All the lists I'm sharing below have either gone 5-0 or 4-1 at a 2-day tournament, so you'll know they have some merit to them. To start, this list here allows you to use a little bit of everything and feel pretty good about it. This is a solid mixed arms list that has a ton of variety, which will look very visually pleasing on the tabletop. You'll have one of each your boats, and a nice smattering of Skyfarer units. The most notable thing about the subfaction is Barrack Zilfin, which allows the list to fit in a single battle regiment for the 1-drop, and from my experience, controlling turn order with KO is very powerful. I also love to see the footnote, there's no reward without risk for the 3d6 charge, and the Battle Ram on the Ironclad. It's always a fun combo to have access to. Overall, it's a well-rounded list that gameplay-wise gives you a good idea of what playing Kharadron Overlords is like. A list like this would be my personal recommendation if you have absolutely no idea where to start. Also, as a side note, you will notice all the lists here use the grand strategy, Rule the Skies. This is because it's rather easy to do if your army contains a couple sky vessels. Many armies don't even have a behemoth that can fly, meaning that as long as you keep one of your boats alive, then you will easily complete this grand strategy. If you're the type of person who has been salivating the entire video over the idea of having a melee-focused Kharadron army that just rams the opponent at max speed and slaps them off the board, this is what you want. Packing a whopping 18 Sky Wardens, this list doesn't mess around. It mostly does what you'd expect. In each of the 2 frigates, you can put the majority of your army to keep them safe, and for the ramming bonuses. But what I really enjoy about it is the use of the Grundstock Gun Hauler, which I'm usually not the biggest fan of, but it fits quite well in this list. It was given the Collapsible Compartments enhancement, and it has just enough room to fit 6 of the Sky Wardens inside, meaning you can launch that boat deep into enemy lines, and those Sky Wardens with the Barrack Zon buff are going to be doing some real work. All the while, it's going to be difficult for your opponent to screen this out, as the gun hauler is going to have enough movement to get exactly where it wants to go. Assuming they charged, when you factor in both their shooting and melee attacks, each pack of 6 Sky Wardens will be doing 21 damage, which is fantastic for their points. And all of this is wrapped in 2 battle regiments to have good control over turn order, which is pretty necessary given this list's complete lack of dedicated screens. Lastly, we have a Barrack Gnar list featuring many of the powerful units I've mentioned previously. This is similar to the first list where it's a mixed arms force, using both shooting and melee to get best of both worlds. There are 2 main power pairs here. We have Brock Grungson, who will give the engine riggers some extra attacks on the charge, and we have a chemist who will be accompanying the big block of 15 Thunderers, who are double reinforced thanks to the sub-faction making them battle line. They can either be moved around by the Ironclad or the Soul Scream Bridge from Spell in a Bottle. The list also opted to go a bit higher in drops to get access to the Voidstone Orb. You also may notice that the list only has 1965 points, giving it a decent chance of gaining a triumph. They chose Inspired to get the once a game +1 to wound bonus, which I would argue is the best choice for most KO lists. Units like Thunderers, who only wound on a 4-up, really appreciate this bonus. Overall, just another solid list. I've been playing around with a similar list and really enjoyed it, although I usually go with Stormcaller for my command trait instead, but that's more of a personal preference kind of thing. Both options are great. Now, I know not everyone watching is a Kharadron Overlords player, so for this section, I'll be going over how to play around them if you ever happen to be fighting them. Obviously, not all of this advice applies to every Kharadron Overlords list, but in general, keep these tips in mind. Biggest thing you'll need to do is screen well when you deploy. You don't want to have your entire army immediately ripped off the board turn 1. I have literally watched games where this exact situation has happened at an event, where a player didn't screen well enough, and they finished their game in an hour and are stuck sitting around for another 2 hours waiting for the next game. If you don't know what a screen is, it's the colloquial term used to describe cheap units whose sole purpose is to protect your more important stuff by physically blocking the enemy from getting close enough to the more valuable models. Now, specifically, if you want to counter fly high, you want to have your very important stuff that you don't want blasted off the table just outside of 3 inches from the front of your screens. The main reason being that a good portion of this army's shooting has a range of 12 inches. This can be said for some of the weapons of engine riggers, sky wardens, thunderers, and both of the larger boats. So, if the Kharadron Overlords player uses Fly High or Soul Scream Bridge to get close to you, they'll be more than 9 inches away from the front of your screen, and therefore more than 12 inches away from your important stuff. Doing this won't stop your opponent from shooting everything in your army, as they do have some longer range shots, and good movement tricks outside of their normal Fly High, but it can keep a good portion of the shooting off of you for the turn. In general, it's best to just ask the Kharadron Overlords player at the start of the game what kind of movement tricks they're bringing in their army, and what their effective threat ranges are. That way you know what you're getting into. Next big thing sort of depends on the list, but oftentimes you'll need to fully commit to completely killing a whole unit. With the healing from their engine riggers and the 4-up rally that the army has access to, it can mean that they have some of the best recovery in the game. Leaving a unit with even a single wound left may leave them open to mostly recover by the time the next battle round rolls around. Don't rely on chip damage to take down their non-hero units unless the list lacks these recovery tools. Now eventually you will have to engage them, and when you do, if possible, you want to avoid having your strongest unit take a hit from Unleash Hell. Try and send something else in first that is less valuable. I've had quite a few opponents who underestimate the shooting of this army and end up completely losing much more than they expected on the charge. Additionally, while the boats can make for some solid protection for their troops and heroes, if the KO player isn't careful, everything inside of the boat could die if the boat is destroyed. Normally, if the boat is destroyed, all models inside must be placed within 3 inches of the boat and 3 inches away from enemy units. However, if you make this impossible to do by surrounding the boat with models in such a way that there is no room for the Kharadron player to place all of their models, then the models will be immediately slain, meaning you will have killed multiple units for the price of one. Not bad. And if you have some ranged damage, their support heroes can be pretty important for their success. For example, if you are able to snipe out their Arcanaut Admiral General, who has the command trait X Grundstock, then you will be starving them of command points for the rest of the game. In this specific scenario, that Admiral was effectively generating 3 command points a turn, and with how command hungry the army is, that's going to hurt. Now, with all of that being said, as I alluded to earlier, in their current iteration, this army is overperforming, and I expect them to get a nerf. But until then, do what you can, even in a losing scenario. Even just making their life harder by really forcing them to work for their battle tactics can be enough to swing games in the other direction. Also, if they do get some major points changes, I'll probably make a follow-up video to this one. And that'll cover it for the Kharadron Overlords. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe. And if you have some of your own advice for playing with or against Kharadron Overlords, or have some other thoughts on the video, leave a comment below. I always appreciate the support my content gets. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you here again soon.